They called it the Texas Territory, 1858. But for the three young women huddled in the back of that prison wagon, it was just hell on wheels. The wagon rumbled and shook, a wooden cage crossing a landscape that didn't want them, heading to a place that would kill them. The eldest, Abigail, was 23. She clutched a tattered family Bible, the last thing she had of her mother and father. Beside her, 19-year-old Rebecca and 17-year-old Charlotte leaned against each other, their faces pale beneath the grime of 3 days' travel. Every jolt sent a fresh spike of pain through their shackled wrists, a constant reminder of the lie that had put them there. They were headed for the Willow Creek Workhouse, a place women went to die. But what awaited them wasn't a prison sentence. It was a twist of fate so violent, so unexpected, it would tear their world apart and rebuild it into something no one could have ever imagined. A storm was coming, and with it, a choice that would change everything. Before we dive into this incredible story of survival and reinvention, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if these stories of impossible odds move you, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because what we have coming up is something you won't want to miss. The prison wagon slammed into another rut, and Abigail bit back a cry as the iron cut deep into her raw flesh. "How much further?" Charlotte whispered, her voice barely a breath. Her green eyes, once so full of life, were now dull with fear. Up front, the driver's assistant, a greasy man named Briggs, heard her. He turned, and a yellow, tobacco-stained grin split his face. "Don't matter how far," he grunted, his eyes crawling over them through the iron bars. "Ain't nobody ever come back from Willow Creek, especially not pretty little things like you three." Abigail felt a fire ignite in her gut. She straightened her spine, locking her gaze with his. The terror churning inside her was a storm, but her eyes were the calm at its center. "We are innocent," she said, her voice low and steady. "This injustice will not stand." Briggs let out a harsh, barking laugh. "That's what they all say, darling. Judge Parker don't make mistakes. And Sheriff Durbin, well, he's got a special interest in your case." His eyes lingered on Rebecca, who flinched and shrank back against her sister. The sheriff had wanted to marry her. His generous offer, as he'd called it, was more like a demand. When she'd refused, he'd destroyed their lives. "I'd rather die than marry that monster," Rebecca muttered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. The wagon jolted again. Haskell, the driver, shouted for Briggs, who gave them one last leering look before turning away. The moment he was gone, the sisters huddled close. It had all happened so fast. 3 weeks ago, they were the Mason sisters, respectable dressmakers, orphans making their own way in the small town of Providence. They had a life. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Then Sheriff Durbin came calling. He was a cruel man with big ambitions, and he'd decided Rebecca would be his wife. Her refusal had sealed their fate. The sheriff, with the help of his cousin, Judge Parker, fabricated charges of theft. They planted stolen goods. They ignored the testimony of Widow Hawkins, who knew the items were legitimate payment for work they'd done. And just like that, 3 innocent women were sentenced to 5 years of hard labor. The plan was as cruel as it was simple. Isolate Rebecca at the workhouse, break her spirit, and then the sheriff would ride in, offering his mercy in exchange for marriage. And if she still refused? Well, accidents happen all the time at Willow Creek. The sky to the west was turning a sick, bruised purple. "The clouds look strange," Charlotte whispered, peering through the small barred window. Abigail saw it too. The air was heavy, electric. A storm was brewing, and inside her, something else was too. Not hope, not yet, but an opportunity. She'd been watching their route, memorizing the terrain. They were deep in the backcountry now, miles from any town. The guards, Haskell and Briggs, were armed, but they were careless. They drank from a flask, they got lazy, and most importantly, Abigail had noticed the key to their shackles. It hung from a ring on Haskell's belt, a belt he took off every single night when they made camp. She leaned in close to her sisters, her voice an urgent whisper. "Listen to me. Tonight when they make camp, be ready. If that storm hits hard, it's our chance." Rebecca's eyes were wide. "Abby, you can't mean—" Would you rather face Willow Creek? Abigail cut her off, her voice grim. We've heard the stories. Most women don't survive 2 years, let alone 5. Charlotte, always the practical one, nodded firmly. I'd rather die trying to escape than rot in that place. The first fat drops of rain splattered against the wagon's canvas roof. Thunder rumbled, a low growl in the distance. Up front, Haskell cursed and whipped the horses, trying to outrun the storm. There's an abandoned trading post about 3 miles ahead, he shouted to Briggs. We'll wait it out there. The wind began to howl and lightning split the sky. The wagon lurched and swayed as Haskell pushed the team too hard on the rough trail. Inside, the sisters braced themselves, their eyes locking in a silent, desperate agreement. The abandoned trading post would be their shelter, but for the Mason sisters, it was something else entirely. It was their stage. Whatever happens, Abigail said, her voice rising above the roar of the wind, we stay together. The rain was coming down in sheets when the trading post came into view, a squat stone building with a sagging roof. Haskell pulled the wagon up close and Briggs jumped down, immediately soaked. Get them inside, Haskell yelled over the storm. Briggs unlocked the wagon and dragged them out, shoving them through the doorway into the dark, musty interior. It smelled of mold and rats, but it was dry. Ain't this cozy? Briggs sneered, pushing them into a corner. Don't get any ideas. A crack of lightning struck nearby, so close the thunder shook the building's foundation. Even Briggs jumped. I'll check on Haskell, he muttered, and stepped back out into the deluge. The second he was gone, Abigail was on her sisters. This is it, she whispered fiercely. A storm like this, they'll never track us if we can get away. But the shackles, Rebecca protested, lifting her chained wrists. Haskell will take his belt off when he comes in to dry off, Abigail insisted. The key is on that ring. I know it is. Charlotte's face was pale but resolute. How do we get it? We create a distraction, Abigail explained, her words coming in a rush. When they're both inside, Charlotte, you're going to fake a seizure. Remember how Widow Hawkins' son looked? Charlotte nodded grimly. Rebecca and I will scream for help. When they're focused on you, I'll go for the key. The door burst open and Haskell staggered in, followed by Briggs, both men soaked and furious. Damned horses nearly broke free, Haskell growled, shrugging off his dripping coat. And then he did it. Just as Abigail predicted, he unbuckled his heavy leather belt to wring out his shirt. The key ring glinted in the dim light. It was now or never. Charlotte caught Abigail's subtle nod. She began to tremble. The tremor started in Charlotte's hands and spread through her whole body. She let out a choked gasp and fell sideways, her limbs stiffening, her back arching in a terrifyingly convincing imitation of an epileptic fit. Help her! Rebecca screamed, her panic only half feigned. She needs help! Please! Both men spun around, startled by the sudden crisis. Haskell had draped his belt over a broken chair near the door, the key ring dangling, a tiny promise of freedom. In that single crucial moment of distraction, Abigail Mason moved. She was a ghost, silent and swift. Briggs knelt awkwardly beside the convulsing Charlotte. What in God's name is wrong with her? He demanded. It's the falling sickness, Rebecca sobbed, grabbing his sleeve. She needs air. As Haskell took a step closer to get a better look, Abigail slipped behind them. Her fingers, nimble from years of fine needlework, closed around the cold, heavy metal of the keyring. She didn't dare breathe, tucking it into the sleeve of her rough prison dress. She was just melting back toward her sisters when the entire building shuddered with a deafening crack of thunder. A huge section of the rotten roof gave way. Rain and debris poured in, and in the chaos of cursing men and collapsing timbers, no one saw Abigail pass the key to Rebecca. Hidden behind their backs, Rebecca's frantic fingers found the lock. Get them away from that corner! Haskell bellowed at Briggs as more of the ceiling groaned, threatening to come down. The wind howled, ripping through the new hole in the roof and extinguishing the single lantern they'd managed to light. In the sudden, violent darkness, Rebecca heard a click. She was free. Then another click. Charlotte was free. And a third. Abigail was free. They kept the unlocked shackles loosely around their wrists, waiting. The moment came with a blinding flash of light. Lightning struck an ancient cottonwood tree right beside the trading post. The massive trunk split with a sound like the world tearing in two and crashed down onto the last solid section of the roof. The impact sent Haskell and Briggs diving for cover. "Now!" Abigail hissed. The three sisters bolted for the door, dropping the shackles as they plunged out into the screaming storm. The rain was a physical blow, blinding them, but they held hands, a human chain against the fury of the night. Behind them, they heard a furious shout, then the sharp crack of a pistol. But the storm was their ally. It swallowed the sound and the bullet, hiding them in its chaos. "This way!" Abigail yelled, pulling them toward a thicket of mesquite she'd noticed earlier. Thorny branches tore at their clothes and skin, but they pushed deeper, fighting for every inch of concealment. For hours they ran, stumbled, and crawled through the darkness, guided only by flashes of lightning. As dawn approached, the storm finally began to die, the rain softening to a drizzle. In the first gray light, they saw they were in a rugged land of limestone hills and cypress-lined creeks. It was wild, unforgiving country, but it was also country that would be impossible for a wagon to follow. "Look," Charlotte said, pointing to the muddy ground. Faintly, they could see the wagon tracks from the day before. "Good," Abigail nodded. "They'll expect us to follow the road to the nearest town. We'll go the opposite direction." "But that's Comanche territory," Rebecca said, her voice laced with a new fear. "Everywhere is someone's territory," Abigail replied grimly. "At least the Comanche aren't specifically looking for us." They pushed west into the hills. By midday, exhausted and starving, they found a shallow cave to hide in. All they had was their mother's Bible and the clothes on their backs. Charlotte, using the knowledge their father had taught her, found a few prickly pears and some edible roots. It wasn't much, but it was something. As the afternoon sun beat down, they had just decided to move on when Charlotte froze, her hand clamping onto Abigail's arm. "Listen," she whispered. In the distance, faint but unmistakable, was the baying of hounds. "Bloodhounds," Rebecca breathed, her eyes wide with terror. "The sheriff uses them to track runaways. They couldn't outrun dogs, not like this." Abigail's mind raced. "The creek," she said, her voice urgent. "Water masks the scent. We have to get to the creek." For the next hour they waded through the cold, rushing water, the sharp rocks slicing their bare feet. The sound of the dogs grew fainter, then disappeared, but they didn't dare leave the water. As dusk began to fall, they finally climbed out, shivering and bleeding. In the fading light, they saw it, a thin plume of smoke rising from beyond the next ridge, a campfire. "Maybe it's a settler," Rebecca whispered, a flicker of hope in her voice. "Someone who can help us." "Or it could be Haskell and Briggs," Charlotte warned, but they had no choice. They were soaked, starving, and the temperature was dropping fast. They had to take the risk. They crept toward the smoke, using the growing darkness for cover. They crawled to the top of the ridge and looked down into a small, protected hollow. A campfire burned brightly, and sitting around it were 5 Comanche warriors. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. Charlotte's fingers dug into Abigail's arm. Every terrifying story they'd ever heard about Comanche raiders came rushing back. They were painted for war, their faces grim in the firelight, their weapons close at hand. This wasn't salvation. This was a different kind of death. "Back away," Abigail breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "Slowly. Don't make a sound." But it was already too late. A twig snapped behind them. They whirled around, their hearts leaping into their throats. A 6th warrior stood there, his arms full of firewood. His dark eyes widened, first in surprise, then in something else, something unreadable. For a long, silent moment, the world stopped. Then the warrior called out to his companions. Instantly, the men around the fire were on their feet, grabbing their bows and lances. "Run!" Rebecca cried, but there was nowhere to go. 2 more warriors seemed to materialize from the shadows on the ridge, blocking their only escape route. They were surrounded. The warrior who had found them, the one with a long, jagged scar running from his temple to his jawline, stepped forward. He was young, maybe mid-20s, and his eyes held not savagery, but a sharp, cautious intelligence. He spoke to them in his own tongue, the words sharp and questioning. "Please," Abigail said, stepping in front of her sisters, a human shield. "We mean you no harm. The warrior's eyes flickered down to their tattered prison dresses, to the raw, red marks on their wrists. His expression changed just slightly. He spoke again to his companions and a rapid, urgent discussion broke out. And then, another sound cut through the night, a sound that made the sisters' blood run cold. The baying of the hounds, closer now than ever before. The Comanche heard it too. Their heads snapped up, their expressions turning from suspicion to hardened fury. The scarred warrior made a decision. He gestured urgently for the sisters to follow him down into the camp. When they hesitated, he pointed toward the sound of the dogs, then drew a finger across his own throat. The message was terrifyingly clear. Whoever was hunting them was an enemy to the Comanche as well. They had stumbled out of one fire and into another. Caught between two deadly forces, they had no choice. They followed the warrior down into the hollow, their legs trembling. The men who surrounded them were a mystery, but the men who hunted them were a certainty. As the firelight illuminated their faces, the scarred warrior studied them. Then he touched his chest and spoke a single word. Nishoba. It was a name. Abigail straightened her shoulders, refusing to show the fear that was trying to swallow her whole. Abigail, she said, then gestured to her sisters. Rebecca. Charlotte. Nishoba nodded once. Then he barked a series of orders. Two warriors melted into the darkness, heading in the direction of the baying hounds. Another began kicking dirt onto the fire, smothering the flames. In less than a minute, the camp was plunged into near total darkness. The sisters found themselves being pulled along, deeper and deeper into the unknown heart of Comanche territory, leaving the sound of their hunters far behind. They traveled through the night, a silent, ghostly procession. Nishoba led the way, his steps sure and silent on the treacherous terrain. Rebecca stumbled, a sharp pain shooting through her ankle. Before she could fall, Nishoba was there, his hand steadying her. His touch was firm, but not cruel. It was the first small crack in the wall of terror she had built around herself. As the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky, they crested a high ridge and stopped. Below them, hidden from the world, was a secret canyon. Vertical walls of red rock rose on three sides, protecting a lush valley floor where a stream glittered like a silver ribbon. It was beautiful, impossible. Nishoba led them down a winding, nearly invisible path carved into the canyon wall. As they reached the bottom, they saw it wasn't empty. Several teepees stood near the far wall, smoke curling from their peaks. Women worked, children played. This was a home. Their arrival sent a ripple through the small community. An older man, his face a mask of authority, emerged from the largest teepee. He was the chief. Nishoba spoke to him, pointing to the sisters, then making a gesture of chains around his wrists, followed by a running motion with his fingers. He was telling their story. The chief, Tarb, studied them with eyes that seemed to see right through them. Finally, he gave a curt nod. Two women led the sisters to a small teepee, set slightly apart from the others. Inside, clean furs were laid out for sleeping, and a small basket held dried meat and berries. They were exhausted, but as they lay down, a single question echoed in their minds. Were they guests, or were they prisoners? The answer, they suspected, was both. They slept for hours, a deep, dreamless sleep of pure exhaustion. When they awoke, the flap of the teepee opened. It was one of the Comanche women. She held a bundle of simple buckskin dresses, a silent offering to replace their tattered prison rags. They changed, the soft leather a strange comfort against their skin. When they stepped outside, Nishoba was waiting. He led them to his father. Tarbe sat smoking a long pipe, his eyes narrowed as he watched them approach. After a long silence, he spoke, and Nishoba translated, his English rough but understandable. Father asked, why white women run from other whites? Abigail chose her words carefully. Bad men, false prison. She held up her wrists, showing the raw marks the shackles had left. Tarb nodded slowly. He spoke again, and Nishoba translated. White law not reach here. Canyon, safe place. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled Abigail's knees, washed over her. They were safe. But just as the thought formed, a commotion erupted at the narrow canyon entrance. Two warriors who had been standing guard came running, their voices sharp with alarm. Instantly, the peaceful camp transformed. Men grabbed weapons. Women herded children toward the teepees. Nishoba's face turned grim. "What is it?" Abigail asked, her heart sinking. "What's happening?" Nishoba's eyes met hers, and in them she saw the answer she had been dreading. "White men," he said, his voice low and hard, "with dogs. They found the trail to the canyon. It was their fault." Abigail's blood ran cold. They had led death to the doorstep of the people who had saved them. The pursuit hadn't ended. It had just followed them here. And now there were more of them. 6 men, the scout reported. Haskell and Briggs must have met up with reinforcements sent by Sheriff Durbin. Tarbay barked orders, and his warriors formed a defensive line near the narrow mouth of the canyon, a wall of grim-faced determination. To Abigail's surprise, Nishoba didn't lead the sisters to the rear to hide. He led them straight to his father. "You know these men," Nishoba said. It wasn't a question. "You tell father what kind of fighters they are." Abigail took a deep breath, pushing down her fear. She described Haskell and Briggs, their carelessness, their cruelty. She described the rifles she knew they carried. She explained that their leader, Sheriff Durbin, was a man driven by pride and vengeance. As she spoke, she saw a flicker of grudging respect in Tarb's eyes. This was not a hysterical woman. This was a strategist. The sun dipped below the canyon rim, plunging the valley into long, creeping shadows. In the twilight, the Comanche warriors waited, their faces now painted for the battle to come. And then, echoing off the high stone walls, came the sound they had been dreading, the baying of the hounds, growing closer with every passing second. Tarbay turned to Nishoba, giving him a final, urgent instruction. Nishoba nodded, then turned to the sisters. "Come," he said. "Father says I take you to a special place, more hidden, safe, even if they enter the canyon." "We won't hide while your people fight for us," Abigail protested. "It is not just for you," Nishoba said, his voice firm. "It is for our women, our children. It is a sacred cave. We only use it when the greatest danger comes." They were being included, folded into the tribe's most desperate measures for survival. They followed Nishoba to a fissure in the canyon's eastern wall, so narrow it was almost invisible. He squeezed through sideways, and the sisters followed, the rough stone scraping their backs and chests. The passage opened into a vast cavern, its ceiling soaring high above them, supported by natural limestone pillars, like a cathedral built by the earth itself. It wasn't empty. By the flickering light of several torches, they saw the women, children, and elders of the tribe, their faces etched with worry but resolute. They were not alone. These people were prepared for a siege. They had food, water from a spring that bubbled up from the cave floor, and even other exits. "There are 3 more paths," Nishoba explained. "One leads deep into the mountains, one to the river, and one to a high place, a watching place." An old woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, approached them. Her name was Makawi, the wise woman of the tribe. She didn't speak English, but her message was clear. They were not to be idle guests. They were to help. Abigail, with her steady hands, was put to work fletching arrows. Rebecca helped sort bundles of healing herbs. Charlotte, to her own surprise, was shown how to mix a poultice for wounds, and she recognized some of the plants from the lessons their father had taught them. They were no longer the Mason sisters, dressmakers from Providence. They were part of a war party, preparing for a fight to the death. Hours passed. Then from the darkness of the entrance passage, a young boy ran in, breathless. He spoke in urgent Comanche. Nishoba turned to them, his face grim. "The white men are at the canyon entrance. Our warriors have stopped them." And then, even through the tons of rock that separated them from the battle, they heard it. The sharp, unmistakable crack of rifle fire. The fight had begun. The women in the cave gathered the children close, their quiet murmurs a stark contrast to the violence echoing from outside. Another series of shots rang out. More shouting. Every sound was a hammer blow against their nerves. Time stretched, bent, and seemed to stop altogether. Then another messenger arrived, his chest heaving. He brought news. Relief washed over the faces of the Comanche women. "What happened?" Abigail demanded of Nishoba. "The fighting is over," he said, a note of pride in his voice. "2 of the white men are dead. The others ran away." A complex mix of relief and horror washed over the sisters, but their reprieve was short-lived. An hour later, when the scouts confirmed it was safe, they returned to the canyon. The bodies of two Comanche warriors lay covered in blankets near the central fire. Their safety had been bought with blood. Tarb stood beside the fallen, his face carved from stone. He looked at Abigail, and through Neshoba he spoke. Two of my sons are gone. Their blood has purchased safety for our people, and for you. We are so sorry, Abigail whispered, the weight of their sacrifice crushing her. The white men who came were already our enemies, Tarb said. This fight would have come, but now it has come to our home. They will return, with more guns, more men. This place is no longer hidden. Then we should leave, Abigail said instantly. We can draw them away from you. Tarb shook his head. They would still come here, believing we hold you, and you would not survive alone. He gestured to the mountains that loomed over the canyon. There is another place, a valley beyond the mountains, known only to a few, a sacred place. We must go there now, before more soldiers come. And us? Charlotte asked, her voice trembling. Tarb's answer changed everything. You come with us. Blood has been spilled to protect you. Now you are bound to our people until the spirits decide otherwise. They weren't guests anymore, and they weren't prisoners. They were something else, something in between. As the tribe prepared for a dawn departure, a new reality settled over them. They were leaving the last vestiges of their old world behind, heading deeper into a life they had only read about in stories. A life of survival, of war, of loyalties forged in blood and fire. And as they began the steep climb out of the canyon, following the Comanche into the unknown, Abigail knew one thing for certain. Their flight from a prison wagon had become something else entirely. It was a journey into the heart of a war they didn't start, but one they would now have to finish. The trail into the mountains was not a path. It was a prayer whispered against the stone. It clung to sheer cliffs, wound through narrow defiles, and balanced on ledges so thin they had to turn sideways to pass. The Comanche moved with a silent, practiced grace, even the wounded, even the elders. But for the sisters, it was a brutal ordeal. Their hands were bloodied, their feet shredded. Still, they did not complain. They just kept moving, one painful step after another. That afternoon, they stopped at a hidden spring. Makawi, the old wise woman, came to Charlotte and offered her a clay pot filled with a greenish paste for her bleeding feet. The relief was instant, a cool numbness that soothed the raw pain. Makawi pointed out the plants she had used, and Charlotte, a student of her father's herbal lore, listened intently, committing the new knowledge to memory. A strange thing was happening. Amidst the fear and exhaustion, they were finding a place. Rebecca, who had always had a way with children, was drawn into a game of stones with a group of young girls. Abigail, meanwhile, stood with Neshoba, looking back the way they had come. The soldiers could follow our tracks, she said. White men do not see the signs like Comanche, Neshoba replied, and they do not climb mountains like Comanche. This land protects those who respect it. But we bring danger to your people, Abigail insisted, the guilt a heavy stone in her stomach. 2 of your warriors are dead because of us. They died protecting the tribe, Neshoba corrected her, his voice low. It was a good death. The concept was alien to her, but in his eyes she saw a truth she couldn't deny. They resumed their climb as the sun began to set, the trail growing even more treacherous. They camped that night in a high, windy hollow, huddled together under shared blankets for warmth. No fires were lit. The risk was too great. Deep in the night, Neshoba woke Abigail, his finger to his lips. He led her to the edge of the hollow. Far below in the moonlit canyon they had fled that morning, she saw them. Tiny pinpricks of light, torches. They found the canyon, Abigail breathed. Many men, Neshoba said grimly. Not just the guards. Soldiers, maybe. This was no longer a posse hunting fugitives. This was a military expedition. We have to move now, Abigail said. Too dangerous in the darkness, Neshoba countered. The mountain will kill more surely than the soldiers. We leave before dawn. But sleep was impossible. Watching those lights, knowing they were being hunted by an army, Abigail felt a desperate plan begin to form. At first light, as the tribe prepared to move, she went to Tarbe. Through Neshoba, she made her proposal. The soldiers are looking for 3 white women. My sisters and I will separate from you. We will leave an obvious trail leading in a different direction. We will draw them off and give your people time to reach the secret valley." Tarb listened, his face unreadable. When the translation was done, he shook his head. "The soldiers have dogs. They would follow both trails, and 3 white women, alone in these mountains, would be hunted by everyone. Soldiers, other tribes, outlaws. It is a brave plan," he conceded, "but it is the wrong path. Our path lies together. For now." The words hung in the air. For now. Their fate was still undecided. They climbed all morning, pushing higher into the unforgiving peaks. By midday, they reached a narrow corridor between towering rock formations. Eagle Pass. The air grew still, the world silent. Tarb stopped, his hand raised. He sensed danger. He sensed scouts scrambling up the rock walls. They waited in breathless silence. And then it came. A whistling sound. And one of the scouts plummeted from his perch, an arrow buried in his chest. Before anyone could scream, a volley of arrows rained down from the rim of the pass. It was an ambush. "Kiowa!" Neshoba yelled, shoving the sisters against the cliff face. A rival tribe. Old enemies. Chaos erupted. The Comanche warriors formed a protective circle around the women and children, returning fire. Kiowa warriors descended into the pass, and the battle became a brutal hand-to-hand struggle. It was a whirlwind of violence, of war cries and the sickening thud of clubs against bone. Abigail saw a Kiowa warrior on a ledge above them, taking aim at the huddle of children. Without thinking, she grabbed a heavy stone and hurled it with all her might. It struck the warrior's shoulder, sending him toppling to his death. The battle raged, a desperate, bloody stalemate. Then Tarb's tomahawk found the Kiowa war chief. The tide turned. The attackers faltered, then fled. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. 4 more Comanche warriors were dead. Many more were wounded. The tribe was shattered. As they tended to their injuries, preparing the dead for their sky burial, they knew their journey had just become infinitely harder. They made a somber camp in the pass, sentries posted, the weight of their losses heavy on every soul. "Will they attack again?" Abigail asked Neshoba as they stood watch under the cold moonlight. "Not tonight," he said, "but they will be back." That was when they heard it, a low whistle from the sentry at the western entrance. Neshoba tensed. "Stay here," he ordered. But Abigail followed, sticking to the shadows. In the moonlight, she saw them, a small group of riders approaching the pass. Not Kiowa, white men. In the lead, unmistakable even at a distance, was the grim, determined figure of Sheriff Durbin. The soldiers had found them. They were trapped. There was no time to panic, no time for fear. Tarb's response was swift and brutal in its efficiency. They would not fight another battle. Not with wounded warriors and terrified children. They would disappear. "Lift the wounded," he commanded. "Leave no trace. We must reach the high path before the soldiers enter the pass." The bodies of the fallen Kiowa were left where they lay. A grim welcome party for the approaching soldiers. "They will think the Kiowa are still here," Neshoba explained. "They will fight each other instead of following us." It was a brilliant, desperate gambit. As the tribe began a frantic, silent evacuation up a nearly invisible trail that snaked up the eastern wall of the pass, they could hear the soldiers' voices echoing below. The deception was working. The new trail was a nightmare, a razor's edge in the darkness, with a dizzying drop into nothing. Charlotte, her feet now a raw agony, bit her lip to keep from crying out. When she stumbled, Idaha, the Comanche woman who had befriended them, caught her. "Lean on me," she said, her voice a solid anchor in the chaos. "Strong together." From a plateau halfway up the mountain, they watched the dawn break. Below them, they could see Sheriff Durbin and his men, confused by the scene of carnage. They were safe for the moment, but Durbin was relentless. Tarb knew he would not give up. The chief made a new decision. The tribe would split. The main group, with the wounded, would continue to the secret valley. A small party of warriors would create a false trail, a grand deception to lead the soldiers on a wild goose chase. "I should go with them," Abigail said instantly. "If Durbin sees a white woman, he'll follow that trail for certain." Tarbe studied her, his dark eyes weighing her courage against the terrible risk. Finally, he gave a single, curt nod, but he added a condition. "My son will go with you," he said. looking at Neshoba. He will guide you, and he will bring you to the valley when it is done. The goodbye was a frantic, tearful embrace. I'll find you, Abigail promised her sisters. This is just a diversion. Then she was gone, disappearing with Neshoba and 5 of the tribe's best warriors. They moved along a visible ledge, deliberately leaving tracks, breaking branches, even leaving threads from a blanket caught on thorns. They were a breadcrumb trail for a monster. It didn't take long. A shout echoed from below. They had been spotted. Rifle fire erupted, bullets chipping stone all around them. They've seen us, Abigail yelled. Good, Neshoba said with a grim smile. Now we run. It was a deadly dance across the face of the mountain. They would show themselves just long to draw fire, then scramble for cover, leading the soldiers further and further away from the tribe's true path. But the soldiers were smart. They split up, sending a group to circle around and cut them off. The trap was sprung with the crack of a rifle. One of the Comanche warriors fell, clutching his shoulder. On a parallel ridge, they saw him. Sheriff Durbin, his rifle raised, a triumphant sneer on his face. They were caught in a crossfire. Their position was hopeless. With a final desperate look at each other, the Comanche warriors did the unthinkable. They let out a unified war cry and charged directly at the closer group of soldiers, a suicidal diversion to save the 2 people they had sworn to protect. Now, Neshoba screamed, grabbing Abigail's hand. They sprinted for a massive jumble of boulders as bullets whizzed past their heads. They dove into a narrow crevice just as 2 more of their protectors fell. Your brothers, Abigail gasped, horrified. They chose the warrior's path, Neshoba said, his voice thick with a grief he could not show. They were alone now, trapped in a maze of stone, with soldiers closing in from all sides. It became a terrifying game of hide-and-seek. They crawled through tight spaces, froze in shadows as boots crunched on gravel just feet away. They were being squeezed, their options dwindling. They reached the edge of the boulder field. Ahead of them was a wide, open slope, their only way out, but to cross it was to die. We wait for darkness, Neshoba whispered, but darkness was hours away. The soldiers were tightening their cordon, a methodical, patient search that would inevitably find them. There was no escape. They were cornered. Just as they braced for the end, a new sound ripped through the air. Not the crack of rifles, but the piercing war cries of more Comanche warriors, coming from the direction they had just fled. It was impossible. The warriors were all dead, or with the main tribe. Who was attacking the soldiers? From their hiding place they saw them, a dozen mounted warriors, their faces painted in unfamiliar patterns, charging the soldiers' position with breathtaking ferocity. Buffalo Clan, Neshoba breathed, his voice filled with disbelief. Allies? Abigail asked. Sometimes, he replied, but all Comanche hate the blue-coat soldiers. This new unexpected attack created the perfect diversion. The soldiers, caught completely by surprise, were now fighting for their own lives. Their hunt for Abigail was forgotten. We go now, Neshoba said. They slipped from the boulders and ran. They sprinted across the open ground, the sounds of the new battle raging behind them. They didn't stop until they crested the far ridge and collapsed into a stand of pine trees, their lungs burning. They were alive. They were free. But as they looked around at the unfamiliar landscape, a new, chilling realization dawned on them. In the chaos of the escape, they had lost the main trail. They were completely and utterly lost. Neshoba, the expert guide, the man who knew these mountains like the back of his hand, looked at the setting sun and then at Abigail, his expression grim. I do not know this path, he admitted. They were alone with no food, no trail, and a dwindling hope of ever finding their way to the secret valley. While Abigail fought for her life on the barren slopes, Rebecca and Charlotte were climbing into paradise. After a final, grueling ascent, they stood on the mountain peak and looked down. Nestled between the peaks was a valley so green, so vibrant, it seemed like a dream. A crystal-clear lake shimmered at its center, fed by cascading waterfalls. Wildflowers painted the meadows in strokes of brilliant color. It was Taha Numu, the sacred valley, a place of peace and healing. But there was no peace in their hearts. All morning they had heard the distant crackle of gunfire, a sound that chipped away at their hope with every shot. "Do you think she's alive?" Charlotte asked, her voice small. "Abby is a survivor," Rebecca said, trying to convince herself as much as her sister. Tarb allowed no time for grief. They descended into the valley and immediately began to set up camp. The tribe moved with a quiet, somber efficiency. That evening, the chief held a ceremony for the warriors who had fallen, for those who had stayed behind to create the diversion. He spoke their names, honoring their sacrifice. When he spoke Nishoba's name, a cold dread washed over the sisters. The tribe was mourning him as if he were already gone. The days that followed were a strange mix of anxiety and adaptation. They waited for news that never came. The silence from the mountain was a deafening roar. To distract themselves from the gnawing fear, they threw themselves into the life of the tribe. Charlotte became an apprentice to Makawi, her knowledge of healing growing every day. The old woman saw a gift in her, a natural talent that transcended language. Rebecca, with her calm and gentle nature, began to teach the children, using their mother's Bible to share stories. To her surprise, Tarb himself would often come and listen, fascinated by the tales from another world. He saw the power in the white man's words, a power his people might need to understand to survive. 3 days after they arrived, Ituha took them to a hidden hot spring. As they soaked in the warm, mineral-rich water, they watched a young boy on the shore point excitedly toward the southern ridge. They all looked up. 2 figures were slowly making their way down the path. 2 figures, not the whole party. "Is it them?" Rebecca whispered, her heart pounding. They scrambled out of the water, dressing hastily as the figures drew closer. And then they knew. It was Nishoba, his arm in a makeshift sling, supporting a limping, battered, but unmistakably alive Abigail. "Abby!" They ran, all 3 of them, and collided in a tangle of arms and tears. The reunion was a raw, emotional explosion of relief and joy that had been suppressed for days. That night, around the central fire, Abigail and Nishoba told their story. The ambush, the desperate charge of the warriors, the chase through the boulder field, the miraculous arrival of the Buffalo clan, and their desperate wandering journey until they stumbled upon a hunting trail that led them home. When they finished, a heavy silence fell over the tribe. Tarb rose, his face a mask of solemn authority. He spoke at length in the Comanche. When he was done, every member of the tribe nodded in agreement. "What did he say?" Abigail asked Ituha. "He says the debt is paid," the Comanche woman translated. "The blood of his warriors has been balanced by your courage. He says you are now free to choose. Stay with our people and become Numanu in truth. Or when you are healed, go your own way. The tribe will not hold you." The choice was laid before them, a crossroads in the heart of their new world. To return to white society was to return to being fugitives, to a life of fear and judgment. To stay was to embrace a world they were only just beginning to understand. Across the fire, Abigail's eyes met Nishoba's. And in that look, she saw that the choice was about more than just survival. It was about a future she had never dared to imagine. As the fire burned low, the 3 sisters huddled together, just as they had done as children when faced with the uncertainties of the world. "What do we do?" Charlotte whispered. Rebecca clutched their mother's Bible. "Father always said God's plan reveals itself in unexpected ways." Abigail looked out at the moonlit valley, this impossible sanctuary. It was a place between worlds, and perhaps, she thought, that was exactly where they belonged. "I think," she said slowly, "that sometimes true freedom isn't about going back to what you know. It's about letting go of who you thought you were supposed to be and discovering who you were meant to become." They had a choice to make, and for the first time, it wasn't about escaping. It was about what they were running toward. 2 weeks in the sacred valley was like a lifetime. It was a time of healing, not just for their bodies, but for their souls. The constant fear that had been their companion for so long began to recede, replaced by the rhythm of life in this hidden world. Abigail spent her days with Nishoba. They walked the shores of the lake, their conversations moving from survival skills to the stories of their lives. A bond, forged in the heat of battle, in the desperation of their escape, was deepening into something more, something quiet and strong. "If we stay," Abigail asked him one day, "what would it mean for us?" Nishoba looked at her, his gaze direct and honest. "It would mean learning our ways, living as Comanche women. Some would always see you as outsiders. But for those who embrace the path, they become Numunu, the people, in their hearts. He then told her something he'd never shared before. His own mother had been a Kiowa captive, taken in a raid as a young girl. She had become Tarba's wife and a respected healer. She had become Comanche. And what of marriage, Abigail dared to ask, between the tribe and those adopted into it? It happens, Neshoba said, a faint smile touching his lips. If both choose it, if the spirits decide their paths should walk as one. Charlotte, meanwhile, was rarely seen without Makawi. She had a healer's hands and a scholar's mind. She absorbed the old woman's knowledge like dry earth soaking up rain, and the tribe began to seek her out for her remedies. She was no longer Charlotte Mason, the dressmaker. She was Healing Hands. Rebecca found her calling as well. Tarbe, the great chief, had become her most dedicated student. He saw the future coming, a tide of white settlement that could not be stopped. He believed that understanding their stories, their language, their God, was a weapon his people would need to survive. Rebecca, the quiet sister, became keeper of stories, a bridge between two worlds. The day came when they knew they had to decide. The tribe would soon migrate to their winter grounds. If the sisters were to leave, it had to be now. They gathered at their favorite spot, a small cliff overlooking the shimmering lake. If we go back, Rebecca said, her voice soft but certain, we go back to being hunted, to a world that has no place for us. Here, Charlotte added, looking at her own calloused hands, we have a place. We have a purpose. Abigail looked at her sisters, their faces stronger, more confident than she had ever seen them. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet resilience. They had been forged into something new in this wild land. Then we agree? Abigail asked. They didn't need to answer with words. The answer was in their eyes. The next morning they stood before Tarbe and the tribal council. Abigail spoke for all of them, her voice ringing with a clarity and confidence that surprised even herself. We choose to stay, she said. A murmur of approval went through the crowd. Tarbe rose, a rare smile touching his weathered face. The spirits guided you here for a reason, he said through Neshoba. Your hearts have been tested and found strong. From this day forward, you are Numunu. In the ceremony that followed, they were given their Comanche names. Charlotte was Ika Povi, Healing Hands. Rebecca was Sa Wuni, Keeper of Stories. And Abigail, the sister who had led them through the storm, was named Mai, Woman Who Finds the Path. That night, the tribe celebrated. As the drums beat and the people danced, Abigail stood with Neshoba, watching her sisters. Charlotte was pointing out constellations to Makawi. Rebecca was laughing, surrounded by a group of children. They were home. The prison wagon that was meant to carry them to their doom had instead carried them to their destiny. They had been stripped of everything they knew, everything they were, only to find their true selves in the heart of a world they had been taught to fear. In the sacred valley between worlds, the Mason sisters discovered that real freedom wasn't the absence of walls. It was the courage to build a new life, on your own terms, on a path of your own making. If you enjoyed this story of survival and finding a new beginning, we've got 2 more incredible tales of resilience waiting for you right on your screen. Just click one to keep the adventure going. And don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another story from us.